When we talk about China today, most people start with tariffs. Then they move to trade wars. Then they likely jump to the TikTok ban. And in some circles, they're talking about semiconductors. But that is not what this episode is about. I'm Bradley Sherman, and this is Population Next. There's another force at play in China today, one that's quieter but far more powerful. It's not making headlines like these other stories. It doesn't show up at customs reports or on balance sheets, at least not now. But it's already reshaping China's future. And soon, it will reshape the world's. That force, my friends, is demographics. Because while the world was focused on China's meteoric rise, its population silently began to collapse. Today, I want to share with you how and why this is happening, and what it means for China, for global power, and for the future of the global economy. For decades, China defied nearly every expectation. It built the world's second largest economy just after the United States in the span of just a single generation. It urbanized at the speed of light at a pace the world has never seen. It lifted 800 million people out of poverty. And it became the workshop of the world. The place where your phone, your shirt, and the sneakers you're wearing today probably came from. But that rise, my friends, came at a cost. It started with the one-child policy. Launched in 1980, the policy was meant to curb runaway population growth. And boy, did it. A generation later, though, it's left China with a shrinking workforce, a rapidly aging population, and a birth rate that's, well, collapsing. Today's China's fertility rate is around 1.0. In some regions, it's even lower. That's half of what's needed to maintain population stability. And for the first time in history, China's population is actually shrinking. It peaked in 2022, far earlier than anyone expected, and now it's in steady decline. They lose millions of people each year. At the same time, death rates are accelerating as the population ages. China is getting older, faster than it's getting richer. And that's a dangerous combination. Now, let's talk about how this shows up in everyday life. Let's start with housing. You see, for years, China's economic growth was driven by construction, not just factories, but cities. In fact, it made up just about a third of GDP for the country. It was urbanization on steroids. Hundreds of new towns and districts built for the future. But what happens when that future doesn't arrive? You get ghost cities. Massive urban developments, roads, towers, shopping malls, with no one to live, work, or shop in them. Why did this happen? Well, it's simple. Young people are not forming families at the same rate. There aren't enough babies. There aren't enough new couples buying homes. China built for a world predicated on growth, and now that growth is gone. And this spells big trouble. Real estate once made up to a third of China's GDP. If prices fall, it doesn't just affect homeowners, it hits local governments, banks, and the middle class. This is what economists call a deflationary spiral. Falling prices, falling confidence, fewer transactions, repeat. And it's starting to happen in China. Let's shift to the job market. China became the world's factory thanks to young, abundant, and cheap workers. But that workforce is shrinking. Every year, fewer people enter the labor force than leave it. The country is simply running out of workers, especially the young ones that were the kindling for growth. And that's pushing wages higher, which is pushing companies to invest in automation. Now, robotics and AI can help, but they're expensive, and not every sector can automate. And as I often say, machines are great, but they don't buy products or services or pay taxes. Labor-intensive industries like textiles or electronics assembly are especially vulnerable. This is why many companies are shifting production out of China altogether. to places like Vietnam, India, or Mexico. The phrase you'll hear now is China plus one. It's a strategy to diversify supply chains because China can no longer guarantee the labor it once did. And remember, this isn't just about factory workers. It's also about engineers, doctors, teachers, caregivers. China is facing a future with too few workers and too many retirees. Let's talk about the Chinese middle class. For the past 15 years, global brands have pinned their hopes on the middle class. China's urban population was growing, incomes were rising. And if you could sell to the Chinese consumer, you could unlock this next wave of global growth. But that story, it's starting to crack. As the workforce shrinks, so does domestic consumption. As people age, they tend to spend less and save more. And younger generations are facing job insecurity, rising housing costs, and a sense that the future just isn't as bright as promised. We've already seen the signs: slower retail sales, weak auto demand, young adults moving back in with their parents, and brands from Apple to Burberry to LVMH reporting disappointing earnings in China. This is not a temporary blip. This is a sign that China may never become the consumption-driven economy that leaders and especially capitalists hope for. Now, here's something you won't see in most reports. Demographics also impact military power. China's military, like any military, needs young, able-bodied recruits. But the youth population is shrinking. That means fewer people to draft and a lower threshold for public support for long and often drawn-out conflicts. Even if China has the weapons, and it does, it may not have the human capital to use them effectively over time. There's also the question of leadership. As the population ages, so does the political class. And an older leadership paired with an older society may take fewer risks or be prone to more authoritarian control, as we've seen in places like Russia. The bottom line: military and geopolitical power will be harder to project in a shrinking society. Now, that does not mean China is powerless. China remains a true, clear, and present threat. But it does mean the window for hard power dominance is narrower than most assume. So what does this all mean? First, China is entering a demographic winter. Decades of population decline and aging. It will strain the economy, the healthcare system, the pension system, and yes, even national defense. Second, the global economy must adapt. Companies and governments that built their strategies around Chinese growth will need to diversify, and fast. Third, this is not just China's story. It's a preview of what many countries will face, from South Korea to Italy to parts of the United States. Demographic change is slow, but relentless. And once it's set in motion, it's nearly impossible for it to reverse. So the question for China and for all of us is this: are we ready? Because the inevitable collapse is underway. Thanks for joining me today. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still thinks population collapse is a distant problem. And let me know in the comments, can China adapt to its demographic future? Or is the Great Slowdown just the beginning? I'm Bradley Sherman, and this is Population Next.